In the blistering heat of a Tempe, Arizona garage, the new owner, Robert Maxwell, stood tall and smug, scanning his shop with the air of someone used to being in charge. When Donovan Smith arrived with his 17-year-old daughter, Maya, the temperature wasn't the only thing that heated up. Robert didn't bother with introductions or courtesy. Instead, he barked, "Tell your daughter to stay out of the way. This ain't a classroom," loud enough for the entire crew to hear. The mechanics around them chuckled awkwardly, unsure how to react. Donovan, a seasoned mechanic with a quiet reputation, said nothing. He had worked under many bosses like Robert before, men who mistook arrogance for authority. But Maya, her hands already smeared with oil from a nearby Aston Martin the 512, heard every word. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look up from her work, her focus unshaken by the insult. For her, the garage was more than just a place of engines and tools. It was a world she had shared with her father since she was a child. Robert's words echoed across the polished concrete. But what he didn't realize was that Maya wasn't just there to watch, she was there to prove. Not to others, but to herself, that she belonged. Little did Robert know, his dismissive comment would set off a chain of events that would challenge his authority and forever change the way the crew saw talent and determination. The air in the garage had been thick with skepticism, but as Maya rolled up her sleeves and leaned into the tangle of wires and engine parts, the temperature seemed to shift. The mechanics, including Robert Maxwell, the owner of the shop, watched with a mixture of doubt and mockery. After all, this was no ordinary V12 engine. It had defied every technician who touched it. Stubbornly refusing to start, Robert's dismissive smirk was practically carved into his face. "Let's see what the prodigy's got," he said, voice laced with sarcasm, challenging Maya to prove herself. Maya's hands moved with a quiet precision, eyes scanning the mess of miswired sensors and jumbled circuits like she was reading a familiar language. With a deep breath, she called out for a T15 screwdriver, her request hanging in the air. Reese, a wiry mechanic with a ball cap tilted back on his head, tossed her the tool with a faint grin. "I want to see where this goes," he muttered. Maya didn't thank him. Her mind was already in the wiring, moving with the kind of focused grace that left even seasoned mechanics blinking in disbelief. As she worked, Maya's calm voice filled the silence. "Someone rerouted your ignition feed to the wrong path. The sensor thinks it's reading 12 volts, but it's barely hitting 8, she explained, her tone matter-of-fact rather than boastful. The other mechanics, who moments before were ready to dismiss her, started shifting closer, curiosity replacing mockery. Reese leaned forward, eyes widening. Where'd she even learn this stuff? Donovan, standing nearby, quietly responded, "Garage at home. She's been fixing engines since she was a kid." The realization dawned slowly for the group. Maya wasn't guessing. She knew exactly what she was doing. With a practiced hand, she unclipped the faulty connection, adjusted the wires, and called for the ignition. Donovan slipped into the driver's seat, turned the key, and though the engine hesitated, it hummed to life with a raw, guttural growl that filled the shop. Reese let out a low whistle, and the room fell into stunned silence. But Maya wasn't done. She quickly pointed out the mismatched airflow settings and explained the need to reset the AQ mappings, which no one had thought of before. With her own tablet and diagnostic app, tools she brought from home, she corrected the system's idle slope and recalibrated the injection delay. Robert stood back, arms crossed, but the smugness was draining from his face. The mechanics, once doubters, were now witnesses to a quiet revolution. Maya's adjustments not only corrected the problem but made the engine run smoother than anyone had managed in weeks. "You reversed the flow from the secondary relay," Reese said, almost in awe. "Yeah," Maya replied simply, wiping her hands on a rag. When Donovan stepped out of the car, he looked at his daughter not with surprise, but with pride. The pride of a man who always knew his daughter had a gift, even if no one else could see it. What struck everyone in that moment wasn't just Maya's technical skill. It was her unwavering composure. She didn't gloat or boast. She simply did what needed to be done. Her calm determination under pressure, her willingness to step up and fix the impossible, shattered the shop's assumptions about what talent looked like. Reese turned to Robert, his voice low but sharp. Luck doesn't rewire relays or reprogram ACUs. You saw it. We all did. Robert's response, a mumbled acknowledgement of her skills, came too late. The respect in the room had already shifted away from him and toward Maya. In that instant, she had turned the garage from a place of doubt into a space where quiet confidence and raw ability spoke louder than any title or years of experience. Maya's fingers moved like they were made for this, tracing the lines of the Ferrari's engine with a practiced ease that silenced the whispers of the men around her. But the real shift came not just from the way she worked but from the way she carried herself. As she straightened after correcting the wiring, a quiet confidence radiated from her. Not the kind that demanded applause but the kind that made people lean in without realizing it. Donovan, her father, watched from the driver's seat, his lips pressed into a thin line of pride he didn't need to voice. Reese, the mechanic who'd earlier teased her, now stood with arms crossed and a grudging admiration in his eyes. She's not just guessing, he murmured, half to himself. Robert, the shop owner, felt the power dynamic slipping from his grasp. One engine fix doesn't make you an expert, he muttered, but the words fell flat. A hollow protest no one echoed. Maya didn't argue, she didn't need to. Her answer was in the steady hum of the V12 engine behind her. A sound that filled the garage like a quiet declaration of competence. As she unplugged her diagnostic tablet and wiped her hands on a rag, her focus never wavered. I wasn't trying to prove anything, she said softly. You put me on the spot. I just didn't want my dad to look bad. That simple truth hit harder than any lecture could. Donovan nodded, a quiet acknowledgement between father and daughter. The rest of the shop fell into a silence more profound than the engine's hum, a silence of realization. The men, from seasoned mechanics to the youngest apprentice, were seeing themselves reflected in Maya's calm determination. It wasn't just her skill that left them speechless. It was the way she embodied what they'd forgotten. That real mastery doesn't come from ego or bravado but from listening, observing, and relentless curiosity. Victor, a young mechanic, spoke up hesitantly. She's the first person in this garage who didn't overthink that engine. She just saw the problem and fixed it. Others murmured agreement, their earlier skepticism crumbling in the face of Maya's quiet competence. Robert, still trying to reassert control, grumbled something about luck, but even he knew he'd lost the room. Reese turned toward him, voice steady. Luck doesn't reprogram ACUs or reset idle slopes from a phone. We all saw it. It wasn't just about Maya's technical skills. It was the way she turned a dare into a masterclass. The way she stayed focused while everyone else was busy doubting her. She wasn't trying to prove herself. She was revealing who she already was. Even Trask, with all his bluster, couldn't dismiss what was now undeniable. The garage wasn't just a space of machinery and grease, it had become, in those moments, a mirror. The men were forced to confront not just their underestimation of Maya but their own tendency to dismiss quiet capability for louder mediocrity. As Maya packed up her tools, Reese asked the question that lingered in everyone's mind. You ever think about doing this for real? Full-time? Maya paused, considering her answer. I like building stuff. I like when things that don't work finally click. It was a simple statement, but it landed with weight. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong or claiming the spotlight. It was about the satisfaction of understanding, of making things right, not just with engines, but with how people treat each other. That day, Maya didn't just fix a Ferrari engine. She rewired the minds of the men in that garage, leaving them with a lesson no workshop manual could teach. Her quiet defiance, her refusal to let assumptions define her, reshaped the way they'd look at the next kid who walked in, whether they were covered in grease or carrying a spark of determination in their eyes. As she and Donovan packed up to leave, Reese called after her, half joking but wholly sincere. Just don't forget us when you're building rocket ships. Maya smiled, a soft curve of her lips. Fix a Ferrari. You don't forget the garage, she said. And with that, she left behind not just a running engine but a room full of people rethinking everything they thought they knew about talent and determination. When Maya left the garage that day, her head was held high, but her steps were measured. It wasn't the swagger of someone who had won anything. It was the quiet grace of someone who had simply done what needed to be done. Donovan walked beside her, the faintest of grins tugging at the corner of his mouth. Told you they'd see it, he murmured, but Maya only gave a soft laugh, her eyes fixed on the sunlit street ahead. Back in the garage, the air was thick with something new, realization. Men who once chuckled at her presence now stood silent. The hum of the Ferrari's engine in the background a stark reminder of what they'd just witnessed. Robert Trask, for all his attempts to salvage his authority, was left staring at a diagnostic printout Maya had generated, clean, precise, undeniable. The men in the shop didn't know how to frame what had happened. For them, engines were predictable. Torque, timing, air-fuel ratios. But Maya had introduced something intangible: grit, focus, humility, and brilliance. It wasn't just the Ferrari she'd fixed. She had recalibrated their understanding of what skill looked like. Reese stood leaning against the workbench, shaking his head. I thought I was sharp, he said softly. She's a whole other level. Victor, still digesting the scene, murmured. She didn't just fix an engine, she shifted the whole room. The lesson wasn't lost on Robert either. He might not have voiced it, but his silence spoke volumes. For years, he'd run the shop with a heavy hand, believing that authority came from seniority and tradition. But that day, Maya had shown him, and everyone else, that real leadership comes from integrity and quiet action. Not posturing. Her calm, methodical approach under pressure made their usual bravado look like noise. It wasn't just her skill with wires and circuits. It was her ability to see the heart of a problem and tackle it without fanfare. After Maya and Donovan left, the shop didn't bounce back into its usual rhythm. Conversations were hushed, glances were exchanged, and even the clatter of tools felt subdued. Trask paced, rubbing his jaw, while Reese eventually broke the silence with a muttered, "She's the first to make me feel like maybe I've been looking at things the wrong way." Victor nodded. She didn't need to shout. She just let the work speak for itself. But the real impact of that day wasn't just in the immediate shift of attitudes. It was in the long-term ripple effect. Over the following weeks, Trask Automotive felt different. There were fewer offhanded remarks about who belonged in the garage. More questions were asked. More listening was done. Reese, once quick with a joke at anyone's expense, now caught himself watching new hires with curiosity instead of skepticism. Even Robert Trask, the reluctant catalyst of change, found himself reconsidering his approach. He hired a female apprentice 2 months later, not to make headlines, but because no one rolled their eyes when the idea was suggested. That unspoken resistance had cracked wide open. Thanks to Maya. At home, Maya pinned the honorary certificate Reese had delivered to her corkboard, next to her MIT acceptance letter and the tag from the first spark plug she'd ever rebuilt. It wasn't a trophy or a symbol of victory. It was a quiet reminder that change is possible even in places that seem stubbornly set in their ways. Donovan, watching her from the doorway, knew she wasn't done yet. "You're just getting started," he said softly. Maya nodded. "I'm not trying to prove anything. I just want to build what works, whether it's engines, ideas, or something else." And maybe that was the real takeaway from that day in the garage. Not that Maya had silenced her critics, but that she had shown them a different way of thinking. A way that didn't rely on who shouted loudest or who had the flashiest tools. A way that prioritized curiosity, respect, and quiet confidence. In the end, Maya's greatest lesson wasn't just how to fix an engine. It was how to shift a mindset. The moment the Ferrari's engine roared to life, the entire garage fell silent. The men who had doubted Maya's abilities, who had sneered and cracked jokes, now stood still, eyes wide, mouths parted as if they were witnessing something they couldn't quite comprehend. It wasn't just the sound of the engine that stunned them. It was the realization that it had been Maya. A 17-year-old girl they had underestimated, who had solved a problem that had eluded them for weeks. Robert Trask's face, once so full of smug disbelief, was now pale and unreadable as he watched her calmly wipe her hands and unplug her diagnostic tool. Reese let out a low whistle. "That's not luck," he muttered. "That's skill, real skill." As Maya stepped back from the Ferrari, she wasn't basking in the glow of victory. Her expression was calm, almost thoughtful, as though she was already considering her next challenge. Donovan, her father, stood nearby, pride radiating from him like heat. But he didn't say a word. He didn't need to. This wasn't about proving her worth to him. He had always known. It was about showing the rest of the world what she was capable of. And that world was now standing dumbfounded in the middle of the garage, processing a reality they hadn't seen coming. The men exchanged glances, some looking embarrassed, others quietly nodding as if acknowledging that they had just been schooled. Reese finally broke the silence, shaking his head. "She fixed it with a phone," he said, almost incredulous. "A phone in a backpack. And we've been staring at that thing for weeks." Another mechanic added, "She wasn't guessing, she was diagnosing." The comments weren't meant to diminish their own skills but to recognize that they had been trapped in their routines, too confident in the ways they had always done things. Maya's approach, blending old-school mechanics with modern diagnostic tools, had shaken them awake. Trask, still trying to salvage his pride, muttered, "One engine doesn't mean she knows everything." But the words fell flat, hollow, lacking the bite they might have carried an hour earlier. Reese turned to him, his voice low but firm. "Maybe not, but she figured out what none of us could. And she did it in less time than we've spent arguing over it." Trask's shoulders sagged slightly, and for the first time, he looked not just frustrated but introspective. He wasn't the center of attention anymore. Maya was. The energy in the garage had shifted. Men who had once dismissed her now looked at her with something resembling respect, maybe even admiration. And Maya, in her quiet, determined way, wasn't trying to be the hero. She was just solving a problem, doing what she loved, and refusing to let anyone's assumptions about her limit what she could accomplish. When she finally spoke, her words were simple and sincere. "I wasn't trying to show off. I just didn't want my dad to be embarrassed." That statement landed harder than any lecture or reprimand could have. It wasn't about ego or proving herself. It was about loyalty, love, and integrity. Reese nodded, his usual sarcasm replaced by genuine admiration. "That's the kind of thinking this place could use more of," he said. The other mechanics murmured in agreement, their earlier dismissiveness now replaced with a growing recognition that Maya had not only fixed the engine but also given them a new perspective on what real skill and character looked like. As she packed up her tools and prepared to leave, Trask cleared his throat. "If you ever want to work here after school or something, let me know," he said, his tone more subdued than before. Maya gave a polite nod. "Thanks, but I've got other plans," she replied, her voice steady. Donovan smiled softly, his heart full, knowing his daughter's path would lead far beyond the confines of any one garage. What Maya left behind in that garage wasn't just a repaired Ferrari, it was a lesson. A reminder that talent and determination don't always come in the packages we expect. And that humility and curiosity can achieve what arrogance and assumptions cannot. The sound of the engine wasn't just a victory, it was a wake-up call. And for everyone in that garage, it marked the beginning of a change they hadn't realized they needed. In the quiet that followed the Ferrari's first clean purr in weeks, something unspoken settled over the garage. Maya's fix wasn't just a technical triumph, it was a challenge to the way everyone in that room viewed skill, potential, and respect. As the engine idled smoothly, Maya stepped back, brushing her grease-streaked hands on her jeans. not in celebration but as a signal that her work was done. Donovan stood nearby, his silent pride as powerful as any applause. Across the room, the mechanics, once dismissive, now introspective, stood still, absorbing the lesson that had just played out in front of them. Even Wesley Trask, whose pride had made him blind to her abilities, was forced to confront his own narrow perceptions. The garage, usually a place of noise and bravado, was now filled with something much quieter and far more powerful: reflection. Reese was the first to speak, his voice carrying a weight it hadn't held before. "We talk a lot about respect in here," he said, "but we don't always show it to the right people." His words hung in the air, a quiet confession and a realization that respect isn't granted by default. It's earned through actions, insight, and integrity. The younger mechanics nodded, understanding not just the truth of Maya's skill but the integrity with which she carried herself. For a brief moment, the hierarchy that had defined the garage, the invisible lines of authority, experience, and gender, blurred. Maya didn't gloat. She didn't rub their noses in their earlier mockery or seek validation. Instead, she offered a quiet observation that resonated deeply with everyone. Maybe the problem wasn't the engine. Maybe it was the way you were looking at it. It wasn't arrogance, it was clarity. An understanding that sometimes experience can be a double-edged sword, blinding you to simpler solutions. Donovan added softly, "She's been watching me fix engines since she was a kid. I didn't even teach her that coil trick. She just learned it by paying attention." The room nodded, the truth settling in. This wasn't about chance or luck. This was about observation, dedication, and a willingness to challenge assumptions. As Maya packed up her tools, the guys in the garage found themselves thinking not just about her talent, but about their own. Rick, the quiet, older mechanic, leaned against a workbench, his voice low and thoughtful. "She didn't come in here to prove herself. She came in to fix what was broken. That's what we should have seen from the start." His words echoed through the room, a call to rethink not just how they approached a job, but how they treated people who didn't fit their expectations. Reese, ever the loudmouth but now humbled, nodded in agreement. "She showed us what we missed because she wasn't afraid to ask different questions. And she didn't care what we thought of her while she did it." Trask, still standing awkwardly by the lift, cleared his throat. His earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by something that almost resembled respect. "If you ever decide you want a place here after school, the offer stands," he said, his voice lower, his tone more genuine. Maya met his gaze calmly, a slight smile playing at her lips. "Thanks," she said, "but I've got other plans." The men nodded, understanding. She wasn't rejecting them out of pride. She was simply destined for something bigger. As Maya and Donovan packed up to leave, the garage felt different. The usual background chatter was absent, replaced by a thoughtful silence. Even after they left, that silence lingered, marking a shift in the culture of the shop. Reese was the first to speak again, this time to no one in particular. "She made us all look at what we'd stopped seeing," he said quietly. Victor added, "And she did it without trying to make us feel bad about it." That was the core of what Maya had done. She hadn't come in to prove them wrong. She came in to show them what they could be. And in doing so, she had redefined the meaning of respect, leaving them not just with a fixed engine but with a mirror reflecting their own potential. The following week, the shop didn't sound the same. The usual playful ribbing was quieter, more thoughtful, and the easy banter that once filled the air was replaced by murmurs of reflection. Reese, standing over the open hood of a 1972 Mustang, glanced at Victor and finally said out loud what everyone had been feeling since Maya had fixed the Ferrari. "I can't stop thinking about last Saturday," he admitted, voice low but clear. Victor, still absorbed in the carburetor he was adjusting, nodded in agreement. "Same here," he murmured. The weight of Maya's lesson, the realization that true expertise wasn't about age, gender, or bravado, still hung over the shop like an invisible curtain. Rick, The quiet mechanic who usually stayed on the edges of conversations walked by with a torque wrench in hand. Overhearing the exchange, "She didn't shame us," he said thoughtfully, pausing in his stride. "She showed us how far we still had to go." His words were simple but resonated deeply. The men around him nodded silently, understanding that Maya's quiet dismantling of their preconceptions had sparked something they hadn't expected. Even Wesley Trask, the shop owner, carried himself differently. Gone was the dismissive tone and swagger. Instead, he walked the floor with more humility, stopping to check progress, glancing at the Ferrari with a respect he hadn't shown before. No one teased, no one mocked. They all knew something had shifted. It was Reese who noticed it first, that Trask, on his own, had spent Sunday night poring over the diagnostic logs Maya had generated. The numbers didn't lie, and Trask wasn't so proud that he could ignore the clear, crisp evidence of her talent. She wasn't lucky, Reese said later to Victor. She knew what she was doing. And it wasn't just skill. It was focus. She saw what we couldn't because she wasn't afraid to look differently. Victor nodded, adding quietly, "Made me realize how lazy I'd gotten with the easy fixes. She showed us there's always more to learn." That realization, that awakening, was perhaps Maya's most lasting impact. Her victory wasn't just turning a stubborn engine back to life. It was igniting a spark of humility and curiosity in people who thought they already knew it all. Even Jameer, the youngest tech just out of trade school, confessed, "She's younger than me, and I'm out here Googling how to reset a throttle body." She made it look like instinct. The respect she had earned wasn't loud or ceremonial, it was deep, quiet, and enduring. Donovan watched these shifts unfold from the sidelines, proud not because Maya had proven herself, but because she had inspired others to rethink what it meant to be capable, to be open to new ideas. Later that afternoon, Trask called Donovan into his office. There were no raised voices, no power plays, just a quiet, almost reluctant admission. "I was wrong," Trask said, not quite meeting Donovan's eyes. "About her, about you, I shouldn't have made it a dare. She's sharp, sharper than anyone I've met under 30. Donovan nodded, his pride for his daughter as steady as his resolve. "She's got more than talent," he replied. "She's got patience and the kind of focus that doesn't come from wanting to impress anyone." Trask sighed, a weight lifting off his shoulders. "Think she'll ever come back here?" he asked. Donovan shook his head gently. "No, but that's not the point, is it?" Outside the office, Reese leaned against a toolbox, watching Donovan emerge. "Everything cool?" he asked. Donovan adjusted his cap, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Better than it was," he said. That sentiment summed up the entire atmosphere of the shop. Things weren't the same as before, they were better, not just because Maya had fixed an engine, but because she had fixed something deeper in the hearts of the men who had watched her do it. As the day wound down and the shop fell into a thoughtful quiet, Reese turned to Victor and said, "She didn't just fix that car. Man, she reminded us why we started turning wrenches in the first place." As the week unfolded, the energy at the shop remained quietly transformed. The weekend incident hadn't just fixed a car, it had realigned perspectives. Jameer, the youngest mechanic, was caught tapping away at his phone, looking up engine specifications more diligently than ever before. Reese and Victor leaned over their workstations, murmuring thoughtfully about airflow ratios and AQ resets. Even Rick, the old-school veteran of the shop, nodded with newfound respect every time Maya's name came up. But what truly solidified the impact was what happened on Friday. Reese showed up with a small, plain box. Inside was a framed photo of Maya, her face captured in a moment of focused determination as she leaned over the Ferrari's engine bay, the spark of mechanical genius clear in her eyes. Below the photo, a simple plaque read, "The day we learned again." Reese hung it proudly in the break room, right above the old coffee machine no one had ever bothered to replace. As the crew gathered around, there were no sarcastic remarks, no dismissive shrugs. Instead, There was a quiet sense of understanding, even reverence. "That's from Saturday," Rick murmured. "The day she made us all take a hard look at ourselves." Victor, who had once been the loudest skeptic, stood back and simply nodded. "She didn't even know we were watching," Reese said quietly. "That's what made it real." Back at home, Maya sat on the garage floor with a half-rebuilt motorbike between her knees. The sun was hot, the air thick with the scent of oil and metal, but she was in her element. Donovan brought out 2 glasses of lemonade, offering one to her with a quiet smile. "Trask called you sharp," he said, leaning against the tool chest. Maya raised an eyebrow. "Doesn't change how he acted," she replied. "No," Donovan agreed, "but it means he's thinking about it now. That's something." She set her drink down beside a box of spark plugs and, almost as an afterthought, asked, "You think they'll remember me?" Her dad's response was simple and heartfelt. "I think they'll remember what you showed them. That there's always more to learn." A few days later, Reese stopped by their home. Unannounced, he carried a manila envelope under his arm and wore an expression somewhere between nervous and proud. Donovan opened the door with a curious glance. "Reese," he greeted, stepping aside to let him in. Maya joined them, her hands still smeared with grease from the bike. Reese handed her the envelope, and when she opened it, her breath caught. Inside was a certificate, crisp and dignified, with the Trask Automotive logo at the top and her name in bold lettering, Maya Morton, Honorary Lead Technician. The citation was clear, for technical excellence, leadership under pressure, and reminding us all why we started turning wrenches in the first place. Maya's eyes scanned the text, absorbing the weight of the recognition. "Thank you," she said simply. Reese scratched his chin, his voice soft. "Most people spend years trying to earn something like that." She shook her head. "I wasn't trying to earn anything." "I know," Reese said, his gaze steady. "That's why it matters." As he left, Maya pinned the certificate on her bedroom wall, just above her acceptance letter from MIT and next to the first spark plug she ever rebuilt. It wasn't for validation. It was a reminder that real change, the kind that alters hearts and minds, often happens in places where no one expects it. Back at the shop, things had shifted. The guys started asking more questions, listening more closely, and, perhaps most importantly, rethinking the way they treated people who didn't fit the mold. Trask himself hired his first female apprentice just 2 months later, not for show, but because the idea of doing so no longer sparked resistance. Maya's impact wasn't just a ripple, it was a wave that reached beyond the shop floor. She hadn't set out to prove herself, but by doing what she loved, by staying calm under pressure, and by showing that quiet determination could be more powerful than any loud boast, she had changed the culture of the garage for good. The following Monday dawned much the same as any other, with the desert sun casting long shadows across the polished concrete floor of Trask Automotive Restorations. But something in the air was palpably different. The usual early morning banter was quieter, the offhand jokes and dismissive comments noticeably absent. Even Trask himself, once known for his boisterous presence and brusque commands, walked the shop floor slower, glancing more thoughtfully at each mechanic's work. At the center of this shift wasn't a new tool or policy. It was the quiet memory of what had transpired just days earlier. Maya Morton's hands had done more than fix an engine, they had opened minds. In Bay 2, Reese leaned over the hood of a '72 Mustang, his usual easy confidence replaced with a contemplative quiet. "I can't stop thinking about Saturday," he admitted, almost to himself. Victor, wiping grease from his hands a few bays down, responded without looking up, "Same. She made us all look kind of stiff." "Huh?" Reese shook his head slowly. "No, she made us realize we stopped learning." Their words weren't laced with shame, but with the realization that pride had long blinded them to possibilities. Rick, the quiet veteran with decades of experience, overheard and joined in. "She didn't shame us," he said, his voice low. "She showed us how far we could go if we were willing to listen." Trask, who had always exuded authority, found himself walking past the Ferrari that Maya had resurrected with little more than a smartphone, a few tools, and sheer determination. He lingered near the vehicle, its glossy paint reflecting the overhead lights, and even traced a finger lightly along the edge of the hood. Gone was the defensive posture he once adopted, in its place was a reluctant respect. Though he wouldn't voice it aloud, he'd spent Sunday evening combing through the diagnostic logs Maya had generated, double-checking her work. The numbers were tight, the corrections were precise. It wasn't luck. She knew exactly what she was doing. Meanwhile, back in Bay 3, Jameer, the youngest technician in the shop, quietly studied a wiring diagram on his phone, revisiting the basics with fresh eyes. She made it look like instinct. He whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Reese, overhearing, offered a reassuring nod. That's because, for her, it probably is. It was a simple observation, yet it carried the weight of a realization that they all shared. Maya hadn't just fixed an engine. She'd reignited a spark that many of them hadn't felt in years. Later that afternoon, Trask called Donovan into his office. There was no bravado this time, no condescending tone, just a quiet request for a conversation. Donovan stepped inside, nodding respectfully as he crossed the threshold. I was wrong, Trask admitted, avoiding eye contact. I shouldn't have challenged her like that. Shouldn't have challenged you either. Donovan remained silent, his stance steady but unyielding. Trask exhaled, the weight of his admission pressing down on him. She's sharp, probably sharper than anyone I've met under 30. Donovan finally spoke. She's more than sharp. She's focused, and she has the kind of patience that doesn't come from needing to impress anyone. Trask looked down, a rare vulnerability softening his features. Do you think she'll ever come back here? Donovan's response was calm but final. No, he said, but that's not the point. Is it? The words lingered, hanging heavy in the air, as if marking the close of one chapter and the tentative opening of another. The ripple effect of Maya's quiet but profound demonstration had reached beyond just the shop. Mechanics who once dismissed her had started to question their own approaches, to re-evaluate their assumptions not just about her, but about anyone who might come through their doors. Reese, Rick, Victor, even Trask himself, found themselves grappling with an uncomfortable but necessary truth. It wasn't about whether Maya would return. It was about how each of them would carry forward the lesson she'd left behind. That Saturday at the garage wasn't just about an engine coming back to life. It was about something far more powerful. Maya Morton's quiet confidence, her steady hands, and her unwavering focus didn't just fix a stubborn V12. They fixed something broken in the hearts of those who had stopped believing that new ideas, especially from unexpected sources, could change everything. Reese, Victor, Rick, even Trask himself, they all walked away with a deeper understanding of what real respect looks like. Maya's presence wasn't about proving she was the smartest person in the room. It was about showing that brilliance, patience, and humility can coexist. She reminded them that the true measure of skill isn't how loud you are or how much you boast. It's about how much you're willing to learn, how hard you're willing to work, and how deeply you listen, even when you think you already know everything. Donovan's quiet pride as he stood by his daughter, not stepping in to shield her from the doubt or dismissive comments, spoke volumes. It was his way of saying, I believe in you, show them who you are. And she did. But it wasn't just the garage crew whose perspectives shifted. When Maya revealed her MIT scholarship, the shop fell silent, not because they were intimidated, but because they were inspired. Here was a young woman who didn't wait for permission to learn, who built her own engines in her backyard, who wrote her own code, and who carried herself with the kind of quiet dignity that made everyone around her reflect on their own behavior. Life isn't about waiting for someone to recognize your worth. It's about knowing it yourself and acting on it. Maya's story is a testament to the power of resilience, curiosity, and authenticity. It's a reminder that the world doesn't always hand you a seat at the table. You sometimes have to build your own table. Set it, and invite others to join you. And when you do, you don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to let your actions speak. This story isn't just about cars or engines, it's about people. It's about realizing that the way you treat someone when you think they have nothing to offer tells the world more about you than any resume ever could. It's about creating spaces where talent is nurtured, where curiosity is encouraged, and where respect is a given, not a reward. And it's about recognizing that sometimes, the most profound lessons come not from the seasoned experts but from the quiet observers who finally get their chance to shine. So, if this story touched something deep within you, if it made you reflect on how you treat others or how you've been treated, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What lessons have you learned from unexpected teachers in your life? Have you ever found yourself in Maya's shoes, or in the shoes of those who doubted her? Let's start a conversation that matters. And if you want to hear more real-life stories like Maya's, stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us of the quiet power within us all, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Click the bell icon so you'll never miss a moment that might just change the way you see the world. Because stories like these aren't just entertainment, they're lessons we carry with us, shaping how we show up for each other, day after day.